Everyone always wants to talk about what motorcycles do to your body, the road rash, the broken collarbone, the statistics that your uncle pulls up at Thanksgiving dinner like he's some kind of NHTSA ambassador. Yeah, we get it, Gerald. It's dangerous. But nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, is talking about what riding does to your brain, not in a it scrambles your eggs when you low side kind of way. In a legitimate, peer reviewed, neuroscientists got together and studied this kind of way. And what they found might be the best argument for getting on two wheels that has ever existed. Benefit 1: riding forces. Mindfulness better than meditation. Let me paint you a picture. You had an absolutely garbage day. Your boss sent one of those emails that's technically professional, but makes your eye twitch. You spilled something on yourself before 10 in the morning. You sat in traffic for 40 minutes listening to a news podcast that somehow left you more depressed than informed. You get home, you drop your bag, and you go for a ride. And here's the thing that non-riders genuinely cannot fully grasp, no matter how many times you try to explain it. The second you're on that bike, the garbage day is just gone. Not suppressed, not temporarily filed away to ambush you at 2 in the morning. Gone. The passive-aggressive email thread, the traffic, the low-grade existential dread you've been carrying around since lunch, all of it evaporates the moment you pull out of the driveway. And if you asked most riders why that happens, they'd probably say something like, because riding is fun, and fun things take your mind off stuff, which is reasonable, which makes intuitive sense, and which is, according to neuroscience, not really what's happening at all. Here's what's actually going on. Researchers have been studying a phenomenon called attentional narrowing for decades. Attentional narrowing is what happens when a task demands so much of your focused, active attention that your brain becomes physically incapable of processing other things simultaneously. Not unwilling, incapable. The cognitive bandwidth just isn't there. And riding a motorcycle, it turns out, is one of the most powerful triggers for attentional narrowing that human beings have ever stumbled into. Think carefully about what you're actually doing when you ride. You've got throttle input in your right hand, front brake in the same hand, clutch in your left, rear brake under your right foot, gear shifter under your left. Your eyes are scanning the road surface, the mirrors, the lane positions of every vehicle around you, the guy in the pickup truck who has not used his mirrors voluntarily since 2003. You're reading the road ahead for surface changes, for hazards, for the corner that's tighter than it looked from a distance. Every single cognitive resource you have is actively deployed. Your brain is not multitasking. It is singularly, completely, beautifully occupied. Neuroscientists call the resulting mental state task-specific mindfulness. And here's why that term matters. It is neurologically, measurably, functionally the same brain state that experienced meditators work for years to achieve. The same suppression of self-referential thought, the same reduction in anxiety-generating mental chatter, the same quality of present moment attention. Except instead of sitting cross-legged in a quiet room focusing on your breath, you're on a machine that revs to 12,000 RPM and sounds like it was engineered specifically to make non-riders question their life choices, which, in my opinion, is a significant improvement on the meditation format. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for rumination, for self-criticism, for replaying that thing you said at a party 7 years ago at completely random intervals for no reason. When you're riding, the prefrontal cortex gets taken offline. Not because anything is suppressing it artificially, but simply because there is no available bandwidth left. It has to stand down. And the relief that produces is immediate, total, and genuinely difficult to replicate through any other means. There's also the default mode network to consider. The default mode network is your brain's idle state, what activates when you're not focused on an external task. And it is, without exaggeration, the single greatest internal generator of anxiety, depression, and psychological misery that evolution ever accidentally built into us. Seriously, the default mode network is responsible for almost every flavor of mental suffering that isn't caused by something actually happening to you right now. It is your brain eating itself. Research shows that passive relaxation, television scrolling, zoning out, doesn't significantly suppress the default mode network. It just gives you something to look at while it keeps running. Riding shuts it down completely. Meditation teachers spend years trying to teach people to achieve that. We just twist the throttle. Benefit 2. Motorcycles are a dopamine delivery system, the good kind. Okay, so here's where someone in the comments is already typing, "That's just an addiction, bro." And look, I hear you, I respect the concern, and also you're not entirely wrong, and I find that deeply irritating. But before you close the tab, let's actually break down what's happening in your brain when you ride, because there is a massive and genuinely important difference between healthy dopamine engagement and the kind of dopamine loop that has you mindlessly refreshing Instagram at 1 in the morning, feeling somehow worse than when you started. Dopamine is your brain's primary reward and motivation neurotransmitter. It gets released when you anticipate or experience something your brain categorizes as rewarding. Now, most people have heard it described as the pleasure chemical, but that's a simplification that drives neuroscientists absolutely crazy. Dopamine isn't really about pleasure, it's about this matters, pay attention, do this again. It's the chemical of motivation, learning, and reinforcement. Pleasure is kind of a side effect. Here's the problem. Most of the ways modern life delivers dopamine are, to put it scientifically, completely broken. Smartphones, social media, junk food, endless content cues designed by people with computer science degrees and zero moral qualms. These things are specifically engineered to trigger tiny frequent dopamine releases that never fully satisfy, which keeps you perpetually reaching for the next hit without ever actually feeling good. Neuroscientists call these supernormal stimuli. Artificial rewards that hijack a system your brain evolved over millions of years to help you do genuinely useful things. Learn skills, build relationships, solve real problems. Your reward system was never designed for infinite scroll. It was designed for effort, engagement, and actual accomplishment. And then Silicon Valley happened. Riding a motorcycle, by contrast, is what researchers describe as an effort-coupled reward experience. The dopamine you get from riding is directly tied to skill, attention, and genuine physical and cognitive engagement. The better you ride, the more demanding the road, the more your brain recognizes the accomplishment and responds accordingly. It's far closer to what an athlete experiences during peak performance than anything you're going to get from your phone. The reward is proportional to the competence and effort required to earn it. That's how the system was always supposed to work. And dopamine isn't even riding solo in this process, if you'll excuse the pun. There's also norepinephrine to consider. Norepinephrine is released alongside dopamine during genuinely stimulating experiences, and it's responsible for that specific feeling of heightened alertness and sharpened focus that riders know intimately. That feeling of being completely switched on, fully present, like every sense is dialed up a notch and your brain is operating at a level it doesn't usually bother with when you're sitting at a desk. That's norepinephrine. And it feels, for lack of a more scientific term, absolutely fantastic. Here's the part that I think is the most compelling, though. Unlike the dopamine response from passive entertainment, the neurochemical boost from riding has a measurable carryover effect that persists well after you've parked the bike. Research on high-engagement physical and cognitive activities consistently shows that the mood elevation and motivational boost can last for hours afterward. This is why riders who go out for a morning ride before work consistently report being in a noticeably better, more focused, more motivated state for the rest of the day. That's not a placebo. That's not just, I did something I enjoy, so I feel good. That's your neurochemistry doing exactly what it was designed to do when you actually give it a real challenge instead of a cheap imitation of one. Now, is it possible to become addicted to riding? I mean, define addicted. I own more motorcycles than I can rationally justify. I've spent money on parts that I will never publicly disclose, and I've rearranged my schedule around rides more times than I'd like to admit. So perhaps I'm not the most objective voice on this question specifically, but from a neuroscience standpoint, it's the good kind of can't stop, won't stop. Mostly. Consult your financial advisor. Benefit 3. Riding actually sharpens your cognitive function. All right, Here's the one I genuinely love the most because it's the one that most thoroughly destroys the motorcyclists are reckless idiots narrative. And I'm going to be honest with you, I take a little personal pleasure in that. Maybe too much. Moving on. In 2009, Yamaha commissioned a legitimate scientific study with researchers in Japan examining what motorcycle riding actually does to your cognitive function. And look, I know what you're thinking. Carl, of course Yamaha funded a study that makes riding look good. Fair. But the methodology was solid, the findings have been referenced by independent researchers since, and frankly the results speak for themselves. Here's what they found. Regular riders showed measurably increased activity in the prefrontal cortex compared to non-riders, and compared to their own baseline on days they didn't ride. Not slightly increased. Measurably, significantly increased. The kind of activity specifically associated with rapid decision-making, spatial reasoning, working memory, and sustained attention. Riding wasn't just fun. It was making people demonstrably sharper at the exact cognitive tasks that matter most when life throws something difficult at you. And when you actually think about what riding demands, this makes complete sense. Every single time you throw a leg over a motorcycle, you are running a continuous high-speed cognitive simulation that your brain has absolutely no choice but to take seriously. You're processing spatial information in real time. Where are the cars? Where are they going? What's the road surface like? Is that truck driver about to change lanes without looking? Is that pothole avoidable, or are we committed now? All of that simultaneously while managing a physical interface of throttle, clutch, front brake, rear brake, body position, and lane placement. That is an enormous sustained cognitive load. And just like physical exercise builds physical capability, regularly subjecting your brain to high cognitive demand builds cognitive capability. Your brain adapts to what you ask of it, so ask more of it. This is where neuroplasticity comes in. Neuroplasticity is the study of how your brain physically changes and rewires itself in response to experience. And researchers in this field have consistently found that complex skill-based activities accelerate the formation of new neural pathways. Riding a motorcycle is almost comically well suited to this. It's novel enough that your brain can't just switch to autopilot. It's demanding enough to require genuine sustained focus. It's physical enough to engage your motor cortex. It's spatial enough to light up your parietal lobe. And crucially, it's enjoyable enough that you actually do it willingly and repeatedly, which, weirdly, matters enormously for neuroplastic change. Turns out your brain doesn't rewire itself very effectively when you hate what you're doing. Who knew? There's also a growing body of research linking regular riding with reduced cognitive decline as riders age. Older motorcyclists, compared to their non-riding peers, tend to show better maintenance of executive function, faster reaction times, and stronger spatial processing well into later life. Now I want to be straight with you here. This is correlational research, not a controlled causal study, and I am not a neuroscientist. I am a person on the internet with a motorcycle problem and a genuine enthusiasm for reading abstracts. But the pattern is consistent, it's been noted by multiple independent research teams, and it aligns perfectly with everything we know about how cognitively demanding activity protects brain health long term. So the next time somebody tells you that riding a motorcycle is something people do when they don't value their brain, you can very calmly, very scientifically, very politely explain to them that your prefrontal cortex is getting more of a workout on a Sunday morning ride than theirs is getting all week. And then you put your helmet on and you ride away, because that is objectively a cooler exit than anything a person standing in a driveway is capable of pulling off. Benefit 4. The stress-killing power of mechanical focus. Let's talk about cortisol. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone, and in the modern world, most people are absolutely marinating in the stuff. Chronic cortisol elevation is associated with anxiety, depression, impaired memory, disrupted sleep, a weakened immune system, and about 47 other things that your doctor will sigh heavily about at your annual checkup. It is categorically bad. And contemporary life is an absolutely magnificent cortisol production machine. Now, there are a lot of things people do to try to reduce cortisol. Exercise, meditation, journaling if you're that kind of person, complaining extensively to anyone who will listen, which studies show actually doesn't help at all but remains wildly popular. But here's what the research on stress reduction consistently shows, and this is the part that I find genuinely fascinating. Passive distraction, watching TV, scrolling your phone, zoning out to the podcast, does not significantly reduce cortisol. It might reduce the conscious experience of stress, meaning you feel less stressed in the moment, but the underlying physiological stress response, the cortisol elevation, the sympathetic nervous system activation, that stuff keeps going in the background. You're not recovering. You're just not paying attention to the fact that you're not recovering. Active, skill-based, flow state-inducing activities, on the other hand, produce measurable cortisol reduction. And here's where we have to talk about flow state, because if you ride and you've never heard the term, you've definitely experienced the thing. Flow state is a concept developed by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, genuinely one of the more fun names in science, and yes, I practice that pronunciation. And it refers to the state of complete absorption in a challenging but manageable task, where your sense of self-consciousness dissolves, time distorts, and you experience what researchers describe as effortless effort. It is, for many people, the most psychologically satisfying state a human being can experience. And the criteria for reliably inducing flow state: clear goals, immediate feedback, and a task that is challenging enough to fully engage your skills without exceeding them. Riding a motorcycle, particularly on a good road, hits every single one of those criteria with alarming precision. The goal is clear. Get through this corner well, navigate this traffic situation safely, hit that apex. The feedback is immediate. You can feel whether you got it right through the bike's behavior, through the sensation in your hands and body. And the challenge scales with your skill, meaning that whether you're a brand new rider white-knuckling it in a parking lot or a seasoned veteran threading through mountain switchbacks, the experience is calibrated to keep you right at that sweet spot of engaged but not overwhelmed. Flow state reliably, measurably, consistently reduces cortisol. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, that's your rest and recovery system, in a way that passive activities simply cannot replicate. A good ride is not just mentally refreshing in the way that watching a film is mentally refreshing. It is physiologically restorative in a way that passive entertainment is fundamentally incapable of being. This is why riders say things like, "I needed that ride" after a hard week, and why non-riders assume they just mean they wanted to go fast. They don't. Or, okay, sometimes they do. But the deeper thing they're reaching for is the specific, irreplaceable psychological reset that comes from being in flow state on a machine that demands everything you've got. Nothing on Netflix can do that. I've checked extensively in the name of research. Benefit 5, the community wires. Your brain for belonging. This is the one that people don't expect, and honestly, it's the one that I think matters most in 2024, or whatever year you're watching this. Time is a flat circle, and I stopped keeping track after the pandemic. Here's the modern crisis that nobody in the motorcycle industry talks about nearly enough. Loneliness. Genuine, widespread, epidemic-level human loneliness. A Surgeon General report in the United States declared loneliness a public health crisis. Researchers have found that chronic loneliness has health effects comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The erosion of genuine community, not online community, not parasocial connection, actual human community, is one of the most significant psychological challenges facing modern society. And here's where oxytocin comes in. Oxytocin is often called the bonding hormone or the trust hormone, and it's released during a genuine social connection, physical interaction, shared experience, mutual vulnerability, being part of a group that faces the same challenges and speaks the same language. Oxytocin is profoundly important for psychological health. It reduces anxiety, counteracts cortisol, and is deeply tied to your sense of meaning and belonging. The motorcycle community is, from a neuroscientific standpoint, an extraordinarily potent oxytocin-generating environment. And I want to explain exactly why that is, because it's not just bikers are friendly, although in my experience we mostly are, occasional road rage incidents notwithstanding. First, there's the shared vulnerability element. Riding a motorcycle involves real, genuine, acknowledged risk. Everyone in the community knows it. Nobody's pretending otherwise. And sharing a real risk with other people is one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms that human neuroscience has identified. It's why soldiers form lifelong bonds. It's why people who go through difficult shared experiences together feel connected at a level that casual social interaction simply cannot produce. When you ride with other people, or even just encounter other riders on the road, there's an implicit acknowledgement of shared vulnerability that immediately creates a kind of connection. Second, there's the shared language and knowledge component. The motorcycle world has its own vocabulary, its own culture, its own references, its own humor, its own hierarchy of respect. Learning that language and being recognized as someone who speaks it activates what tribal psychology researchers call in-group identification, which is associated with significant oxytocin release and a genuine sense of belonging and identity. And then there's the biker wave, which I know Carl covered in another video. Hi, Carl. Love the content. Very handsome. But from a neuroscience standpoint, that simple two-fingered acknowledgement between strangers is actually kind of remarkable. It's a ritualized recognition signal between members of a shared community, and even that tiny interaction triggers a small but real neurochemical response. You see a rider coming the other way, you exchange the wave, and your brain goes, "Ah, my people," even if you've never met, even if they're on a completely different kind of bike. Even if one of you is on a sport bike and one of you is on a cruiser, and under normal circumstances, you'd have absolutely nothing to say to each other. The motorcycle community, at its best, provides something that an enormous number of people in modern life are genuinely starving for: a tribe, a real one, built on shared experience, shared risk, shared language, and a mutual understanding that outsiders simply don't have access to, and your brain rewards you chemically for being part of it. That is not nothing. In 2024, again or whenever, that might actually be everything. Okay, let's land this plane. Or, park the bike. That metaphor works better here. Here's what we've covered. Riding motorcycles forces your brain into a genuine mindfulness state that suppresses rumination and anxiety better than most meditation practices. It delivers a healthy, effort-coupled dopamine response that actually makes you feel good rather than keeping you endlessly chasing a hit. It demonstrably improves cognitive function and has been linked in multiple studies to better decision-making, sharper spatial reasoning, and reduced cognitive decline. It produces measurable cortisol reduction through flow state in a way that passive entertainment simply cannot replicate. And it plugs you into a community that triggers the kind of genuine belonging response that your brain is quite literally wired to need. And the mainstream narrative is that we're the reckless ones. Look, I'm not going to stand here and tell you motorcycles are safe. They're not. You know that. I know that. Your Uncle Gerald definitely knows that. Risk is real, and it should be taken seriously, and you should wear your gear and ride like nobody can see you, and generally conduct yourself like someone who enjoys being alive. All of that is true. But the conversation about motorcycles has been completely one-sided for way too long. We talk about what riding costs you without ever talking about what it gives you. And what it gives you, it turns out, isn't just fun. It's a genuinely, measurably, neurologically significant contribution to your psychological well-being. So the next time someone asks you why you ride, you don't have to say because it's fun or because I'm insane or shrug and change the subject. You can say because it makes my brain work better, it reduces my cortisol, it puts me in a flow state, and it connects me to a community in a way that my dopamine receptors find deeply satisfying. And then watch their face while they try to figure out whether to be impressed or concerned. Either reaction is fine. That's going to do it for today. If you got something out of this video, smash that like button, leave a comment, let me know which of these benefits hit hardest for you personally. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Get in here. We've got bikes and bad jokes and occasionally some actual useful information, and that's a better deal than most things in life. I'm Carl. Ride safe. Wear your gear. And for the love of all things holy, cancel your blinker. Goodbye.